Welcome. So everyone's aware, the council did begin its meeting downstairs and then immediately adjourned into executive session for purposes of discussing the sale or lease of property owned by the public body. We adjourned out of executive session and are now currently in regular session. However, we will be temporarily suspending regular session so we can convene into the Finance Committee. Chairman Pantaleon?
Thank you, Mayor Schoenheider. This is the January 17th, 2017 regular meeting of the Lake Forest City Council Finance Committee. Will Elizabeth take the roll, please?
Certainly. Mayor Schoenheider.
Here.
Chairman Pantaleon.
Here.
Alderman Waldeck.
Here.
Alderman Beidler.
Here.
Alderman Newman.
Here.
Alderman Reisenberg.
Here.
Alderman Tack. Here. Alderman Bushman.
Here.
Alderman Moreno.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Next item on the agenda is consideration of minutes from the Finance Committee meeting held on November 14th, 2016. Are there any corrections, additions, or other changes needed? There being none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting.
Second.
Moved by Alderman Newman, seconded by Alderman Moreno. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, meeting minutes are approved. The next item is a review of the capital budget, which is a fiscal year 18 item, but we're beginning the process of getting into the budget already for fiscal year 2018, and that's going to be presented to us by Elizabeth Holub, the Finance Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a follow-up from the November 14th Finance Committee meeting, which was the capital budget workshop for fiscal year 2018. We just wanted to brief you quickly on the updates that have been made based on the discussion that occurred at the November 14th meeting. The items included in your packet begin on page 7 of the packet. The updates that were made primarily relate to the projects included on the Priority 1 Not Funded list that were proposed for funding from alternative funding sources. So those projects that were proposed for funding and were the subject of discussion on November 14th that have now been moved from the 1 Not Funded list to the Priority 1 list and now included in the 5-year capital improvement program are included on the capital improvement program list beginning on page 7 and are highlighted in yellow. So those items are clearly noted in yellow. Included on those lists, pages 7 through 9, and were discussed on November 14th. So those are now moved from the not funded list to the funded list and included as funded and will be incorporated in the FY18 budget. We've also updated the 5-year financial forecast for the capital-related funds. Those begin on page 16 of your packet. The first 5-year forecast is the Capital Improvement Fund. The changes that have been made from the 5-year forecast that you saw on November 14th have been highlighted in yellow. So the changes made in the Capital Improvement Fund are the incorporation of the Capital Improvement Levy as approved by the City Council in December. A capital improvement line item in the 2016 levy is now incorporated and will be deposited into the Capital Improvement Fund as an ongoing funding source for the 5-year capital improvement program. So that's now shown as a funding source, as well as the transfer into the Capital Improvement Fund, transfers from Funds 122 and 124, which represent the permit fees related to Laurel and Western redevelopment and the Lake Forest Hospital. So that's the $1,784,883 coming in to fund those 1 NF projects that we discussed on November 14th, which does change the total expenditures for FY18 as reflected also in yellow. No changes in the motor fuel tax fund, but you just have the 5-year forecast on page 17 for that fund. A minor change on page 18 in the Park and Public Land Fund reflects the incoming permit fees related to Laurel and Western that will be deposited to the Park and Public Land Fund related to park projects, and then the water capital 5-year forecast is updated as well on page 19. So any questions related to that, I'll be happy to answer. There obviously will be more discussion at the March budget meeting related to the capital improvement program when we also discuss the operating budget, but we just wanted to give you the brief update on those changes that have been made.
One question, if I may. On the water fund, this is for CapEx only and does not include the pension surcharge. The pension surcharge, the $10 per quarter per residential that we talked about, is not included in the schedule on page 19. The water fund schedule
Correct.
is capital only.
That is capital only. Actually, the water surcharge related to pension will go into the general fund, and then that will be included in the general operating fund and then be transferred out to the police and fire pension funds as part of the operating budget.
Okay.
So it will actually never come into the water fund.
Thank you.
But thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you for that update, Elizabeth. The next item on the agenda is a discussion of investment policy and procedures, which will also be presented by Elizabeth, or at least the issues will be presented by Elizabeth, and then we are seeking input. So,
Thank you. Again, this is a returning item. This was originally on your July 18th agenda. The reason this is on your agenda, this is a working item for the Finance Department for FY17. The city's investment policy has not been updated since 2004. And recognizing that we were approaching a period of time where we were likely going to see interest rates rising, we wanted to be in a position where we could look at alternative investments for the city and perhaps capitalize on alternative investments and improved interest income for the city's deposits. The city is very limited in its investment options on liquid investments on its operating funds through the state statutes. But there is some opportunities in a rising interest rate environment to do better than just simply depositing these funds in banks. And so we wanted to capitalize on that and update the investment policy. In addition, the city does not have an investment procedures manual. So in addition to that, we wanted to develop an investment procedures manual and have a structure in place to set up an investment program. So in July, we provided a draft investment policy, updated investment policy, and a draft investment procedures manual. The Finance Committee discussed that and requested some changes to those documents, which we've incorporated in your packet today. Those changes have been provided in red line format, so you can clearly see the changes to the documents that you saw in July. And I believe all those changes have been incorporated, but I'll be happy to answer any questions, or we can talk about any further changes that you'd like to see made this evening. And then the investment policy, if ready for City Council approval, can be brought forward at a meeting in February or March for the City Council's formal approval.
perhaps you could spend a second talking about what funds these are. What is this capital that's being invested?
Sure. The city has a lot of operating funds available for deposit. The city has fund balances, healthy fund balance reserves of its operating funds available for deposit. And because of the limitations and a very good banking relationship, we've simply left those funds on deposit with our banking, with our bank, our local bank, because we get a very competitive return. And in the low interest rate environment lately, we couldn't do better. But in a rising interest rate environment, we can put those in certificates of deposit or purchase treasuries or agencies and perhaps get a better return on some of those deposits. This does not cover pension funds, which are separately invested and have very different rules related to them. It doesn't relate to the cemetery investments, which are handled by a separate cemetery commission and also have very different rules associated with them. They are very limited. They cannot be invested in equities. So they are mostly fixed income opportunities, certificates of deposit, treasuries, and agencies are pretty much as far as we can go in investing these funds.
You mentioned alternative investments. Could you describe what those might be?
Sure. I mean, alternatives, perhaps not
Not the kind you're thinking of.
So you're talking about CDs and treasuries
Right,
as opposed to
absolutely.
cash on deposit at banks?
Still in the fixed income world as far as investments, and we are limited by state statute on what we can invest those
Right,
deposits
okay,
in.
thank you.
And what kind of liquidity is required?
The city does have some latitude in that, so we can go out to 5-10 years. We can purchase treasuries that go out
But they're
an
marked
extended period of time
highly marketable still.
within the investment policy provisions.
Elizabeth, I think I can't find it now, but I think it's in the policy, not in the manual, that provides for an annual review of the policy. Is that correct?
Correct.
So, and I guess we been since 2004 annually reviewing our policy, or is,
I don't believe our 2004 policy requires an annual review.
okay.
It
okay,
just requires that any revisions of the policy be approved by the city
okay,
council.
Okay, so an annual review means that we will be, there could conceivably be a new date on this policy every year that it's reviewed.
Correct.
So that we will be doing this much, so more formally and more frequently than we did before.
Correct.
Which seems like a good idea to me.
Right.
Thank you.
In the manual, it states that transactions in excess of 500,000 have to be approved by the Finance Committee Chair. Could you frame up 500,000 for me? Is that a significant percentage of the traditional maximum of this fund? Is it, the number itself doesn't concern me, but I'm interested to think about it in terms of its relation to the absolute value of the fund at a maximum point in time.
The city currently has $48 million on deposit.
Small amount.
So we're talking about, and this would be a single investment transaction of $500,000. And we would not contemplate ever investing that high of a percentage of the deposits. Most of those deposits would remain liquid. And we'd have to decide what proportion of those total deposits ended up being in an investment program. But to give you an idea of the total assets available and on deposit.
Thank you.
Other questions for Elizabeth? Okay, this is more of a follow-up. Really don't have to take action per se, except to, I guess the next thing would be that it would be formally approved at the council level?
If no further revisions are contemplated, then we would bring the investment policy back to a city council agenda for formal approval.
Great, thank you. Next item on the agenda for the Finance Committee is other business, and really, there were attachments in our packages for the annual review in advance of the fiscal year 18 budget of core and elective service analyses. I assume each of us in our area of interest made any comments offline on that, but if there are any that need to be made here, we can certainly entertain them. Okay, there being none. Next item is a draft of the Information Technology 5-Year Capital Improvement Plan, which is another fiscal year 18 budget item. And if there are comments on that, I know that's also been reviewed prior to this, but this was sort of to come back and make sure that everybody's input has been incorporated. Okay, no other comments on that. And then finally, and Elizabeth, maybe you can speak to this for a brief, minute or so. The flash report for December 2016. This is the monthly 2-page, 3-page financial summary review that the city council members all receive. Allows us to try to spot trends and budget variances in advance of becoming serious issues. And there are some interesting trends happening that I think would be good if you could just briefly hit the high points for us.
I think the biggest item that was a change from the prior month relates to income tax. I think that is an issue that is really perplexing everyone. The Illinois Municipal League is spending a lot of time talking to the Illinois Department of Revenue regarding the income tax reporting that's coming out, and why the distributions are varying so much and falling so short of prior year distributions. So I noted in the flash report that their current projections that came out in December indicated that municipalities could see a 9% decline in FY17 compared to actual distributions compared to FY16. And that compares to a 1.5% increase that we budgeted. So that's a 10% difference off of budget. There was an accounting system change, which is one thing that the Department of Revenue has come back with. And so I think they're still working through that accounting system change and how much that is an effect, and how that's affected their reporting. I know the Illinois Municipal League is working this very aggressively and talking a lot with the Illinois Department of Revenue, but they're having a lot of challenges with giving us answers.
Just producing information.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a concern for everybody. And
So just as a refresher for everybody, maybe talk a little bit about how the income tax works and how it affects the city.
so
I mean, we all know how it works. They take our money and, you know, but once it gets to the state, what happens to it?
Right, so the State Department of Revenue takes in income taxes, and then a percentage of income taxes are then distributed to the municipalities on a per capita basis. And so we receive a percentage of their collections. And so oftentimes, you know, changes in receipts affect distributions to municipalities. Certainly changes in rates can affect, and so as the rates increased and then that sunsetted and came back down, that affected, but the formula changed as well. So all of those variables have affected the distributions to municipalities over time. So the Illinois Municipal League staff attempts to statistically monitor that and study that. Even delays in refunds paid out to taxpayers can affect those distributions to municipalities. So they study that closely. They attempt to analyze it and try to report to municipalities, essentially auditing that for us, so that we can have reasonable comfort on knowing that we're receiving our fair share.
And is it fair to say that we don't have reasonable comfort that that's the case right now?
I think that's probably a fair statement. I think Illinois Municipal League still has a lot of questions about the data they have that just doesn't seem to make sense.
Okay.
Can you give us a number, excuse me, of what that 10.5% variance would mean in dollars?
For us, that 10.5% is about $200,000.
On an annual basis?
Yes.
We had a couple windfalls from the real estate transfer
Yes,
tax,
we
but
did. Not that much.
Not repeating either.
No. So, other questions for Elizabeth or finance-related comments from City Council?
If I could, Chairman Pandelon, I had a question, maybe Bob or maybe Elizabeth, just an update. I know legislation was introduced in Springfield during the veto session that may or may not result in finally a budget proposal and a budget for the state after a couple of years, but it did involve significant impact municipally, including a 2-year property tax freeze. There was some discussion, I know, about a permanent tax freeze. Bob, do you have any more update on that you could share with us?
Well, little, beyond what I think many of you have read in the newspaper. Right near the end of the veto session, there was this grand plan that came out of the Senate. Elizabeth and I were chatting today because we questioned how much of it was gamesmanship, knowing that they didn't have enough time to act on it and get it to the House and act on it. So it was sort of floated out there, I think, to sort of gauge what kind of reaction would they would receive from constituents back in their home district. We have a legislative breakfast this Saturday with the Northwest Municipal Conference, and some of those questions I think will be on the table. But it's my belief that they do have a grand plan that has been negotiated over the last 4 or 5 months that the Senate is going to present, and I think to a large extent the governor may sign on to. But the real question is, what will Speaker Madigan do? And I think at this point nobody knows, and so they don't know really where the legislation will go at this point in time. So, but again, I think as we've seen in the past 18 months, since they've operated without a budget, that it's anybody's guess as to what ultimately will be happening. But, you know, I think that it's gotten to the point where they know they have to do something, and I'm pleased to see that leadership in the Senate has said it's time to now start governing and stop campaigning. Hopefully the House will follow suit, but we'll see. We'll have to wait and see.
If you had to handicap the property tax freeze on a probability basis, do you think that's
I
40%, 60%, 80% chance?
I think a property tax freeze for a couple of years, I would put it in maybe the 60 to 70% range. I think some of the bills that were introduced very late to do a permanent property tax freeze, I think that was a lot of show. And I don't think that there's interest there, because I think the legislature feels they need to do something because they are hearing from their constituents. And I know the governor feels very strongly about it. And so I think you will see something. I think the real debate's going to be how long that period of time is going to be, because, you know, it isn't just municipalities, school districts, park districts, all these other taxing bodies are going to feel it, because while we have opportunities to raise revenue in other ways, shapes, or form, I think at the school level, it's 98% of the revenue is property taxes. And I think, you know, many of the other districts are the same way.
So it's back to that original sort of fact that the state, which is going to mandate a property tax freeze, actually collects no property taxes.
Right.
All those taxes are collected locally.
Right.
And spent locally. So,
And I think it's going to be part of a grand plan for that reason, because quite candidly, you know, there's a real question as to why they haven't already done it, because it doesn't impact them. It's something the governor wants, and I think it's just been more political than anything that they haven't acted yet.
teachers' unions.
And unfortunately for us, it appears to be coming along with no opt-out for public sector pensions.
Right. Yeah, we have not seen that introduced yet.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is opportunity for the public to address the Finance Committee. If there's any member of the public that would like to speak to the Finance Committee, recognizing that the City Council is going to go into session probably within the next 5 minutes, and there'll be another opportunity there. But if there are specific financial concepts or questions that anybody in the public has, feel free to identify yourself and step forward. Okay, there being none, the next item on the agenda is motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the Finance Committee meeting is adjourned.
And City Council will begin promptly at 7 p.m.